Hey, it's an incredible opportunity and a privilege to be able to talk to this chamber in Washington County and St. George. You're an important part of our state. It's why my running mate is your commissioner, County Commissioner Victor Iverson. We have seen as I traveled the state, I announced my candidacy back in January 8th. The state had its challenges, as every state does, but the world looks a little differently now. But the goal still stays the same: economic prosperity, a conservative approach. Smaller government, lower taxes, less regulatory burden. How do we make sure that we see prosperity with an eye to our constitutional liberties and making sure that we're doing what the role of government is? And if you do it right, you can see that growth. Your county has grown in spite of the odds being against it. It has not been the go-ed model of job growth where the highest populated area of the state receives most of the attention. You've had that. You've been on the outside looking in on that. As I've traveled as a candidate throughout the state, my message and this ticket is important to communicate that the future of our state is great. The sky is the limit, but it is going to take this entire state and economic prosperity found throughout the state, its population growing, its infrastructure investment throughout the state of Utah to really meet its potential and really satisfy this emerging workforce we have with young people being one of the youngest states in the country. So with that said, I look forward to these questions because we're going to dive into those issues more specifically, but this is a growth ticket. This is a conservative ticket. This is a ticket that does not represent any geographical area of the state. It represents the whole state. And I'm convinced, and we're convinced, Commissioner Iverson and I, that a conservative approach without any excuses, without any apologies, is the answer. It's been the answer for the state of Utah so far, and it's the way we're going to proceed as a state going into the future.
Great. You mentioned in there GOED, so I want to ask you a few questions about that and the state's current economic development strategy, as well as previously. So first, let me ask you about Utah's position as a powerhouse economy. It really has been an envy to other states. What factors do you believe led to our economic prowess, and how do we once again solidify that #1 spot as the strongest economy in the nation?
Thanks. So yeah, we are. I mean, Utah is no longer a flyover state. Our economic strength has been seen and it is well understood around the country. And this is the reason, these are some of the reasons why. We're a young state. Why is that important? Because if you want your economy to grow and you want to see economic prosperity on a trajectory that continues to improve quality of life and having opportunity, you need a young workforce that will fill those jobs and keep that on that trajectory. You have some states in America that are shrinking in size. Their population's aging. There's challenges that come with that. One of our greatest infrastructure challenges is this emerging workforce of young people. We're an entrepreneurial state. We are the beehive state, a state of industry. We work hard, and we've seen the fruits of those labors. So that's the qualities that you can't manufacture or blueprint. That's just what the state is, and that's been an advantage. What we've also seen, though, is this conservative approach to economic development. And what does that mean? Lower taxes. The tax burden, much lower in our state than surrounding states or around the country. We have a regulatory climate where we know that if we can get out of the way, if government gets out of the way, business can do what they do best, and that is be prosperous and successful in what they do. And so you see a regulatory climate and a tax climate that's very favorable. What we have to do in the future, knowing that if we just wanted to get back to where the state of Utah's economy was just in the first week of March, fiscal analysts in the state of Utah in the legislature are saying and pointing towards a recovery that could take 2 to 4 years just to get back to where we were at the beginning of March. That's a sobering timeline when you think about it. That means we're in a pretty deep hole and we got to dig out. The way you dig out is you empower people. You lower and continue to lower the regulatory climate. We make sure that this tax, whatever we do not raise taxes in a time like this or think that you can by raising the percentage of what you tax. You're going to see more revenue because that won't work. And so we do those things, and we be careful with the federal funds. That will be there will be a lure or an attraction to federal funds that will not make the state stronger to be dependent on federal funds when building our state budget.
Great. And you mentioned regulatory, and that's something that we're as a business community, we're always concerned about, is overburdensome regulation. So in 2011, Utah conducted an aggressive regulatory review that eliminated unnecessary and overly burdensome regulations that really inhibited the economic competitiveness of the state. What is your strategy specifically to ensure that we can operate without those unnecessary burdens, both from state and from local government?
So let me shape it this way. We've had what I would call regulatory creep or bureaucratic creep over a long period of time. When you have a gubernatorial administration and you see kind of the same faces. I was elected to the state house in 2002, and many of the faces and the people that are there, great people, but you see a lot of the familiar faces along the way here 18 years later. I think that when you have an open seat for governor, it gives you an incredible opportunity to see these department heads and see a cabinet for a governor that is different than it's been up until now. What I would propose and what the Hughes Iverson administration would propose is I would love to approach business leaders, people that have had to interface with the state of Utah, its departments, and have learned. There's great empathy when you have to work with the state of Utah and what those relationships look like. I'd like to approach leaders that have never been looking for a state job. They aren't wanting to work for the state necessarily, but they have this important perspective that they could take 4 years of their life and be a cabinet member and lead a department and put the service back in public service and the servant back in public servant. I think that's not easy to do, but this is the time and the window we have to do that. And I think that changes the regulatory climate very quickly in terms of having that kind of new perspective in terms of the interface that the state of Utah would have with the public. I'm told, and I learned this, I think it was at your chamber meeting, that our Department of Environmental Quality is more prohibitive or has a more burdensome regulatory climate than the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency of the federal government. It is not. EPA, I've never heard it considered a conservative think tank, the EPA. I am shocked when I learn, and I learn it from the people that interface with state government, that we have, like Department of Environmental Quality or other examples, where the state of Utah can be or might be more burdensome or more prohibitive than even our federal government. That is not a standard we ever should be comfortable with, and you'd see that change with our administration.
Great. Let me ask you a bit more as we talk about the regulatory environment and strategies the state has implemented to promote economic development. In the past, Utah has identified and promoted growth of certain industries in its economic development strategy. Will you continue this? And if so, what industries should the state be targeting and how will you ensure that the growth that occurs is spread across the entire state?
So I'm not into picking winners and losers as a government. I don't think we should be anointing certain industries over at the expense of other industries in the state of Utah. We were fortunate before we got into this self-quarantine and this virus that we're in right now and how we're handling it, to have 45 town hall meetings around the whole state. And there was not an occasion where I didn't meet with locally elected public officials, have town hall meetings where I heard from the public, where there is not an economy and there are not people that see their economy, whether it's agriculture, manufacturing, professional, whatever it might be. And people see barriers to the markets. They see the challenges that they have. It's the role of government, state government, to lower those barriers by what? By infrastructure investment. We need better roads and roads that access areas up throughout the whole state. We need a rail system that's pretty good in the state of Utah, but could be better through spurs and connecting this rail system we have in our state. Water, a critical infrastructure. You can't grow without it. We have one of the highest birth rates in the nation. We're going to grow from within. Plus, we are a city on the hill in terms of economic prosperity. So we see the state grow. Water's got a critical part of that. So as we as a state invest in the water and road and rail and fiber optics, the technology corridor, I think that every community and every county, they understand what opportunities they have. And I also think a smart infrastructure system throughout the state attracts more jobs. I think the COVID-19 challenge is that we want to have more. We see with the global supply chain how tenuous or scary that can be if we're not making our own pharmaceuticals or if we don't have a strong manufacturing sector in the United States. Well, I believe strongly that Utah can be one of those hubs in the country for strong manufacturing and strong economic growth and even exports as we get to the ports, as every rail system in Utah leads to one of the ports along our west coast. There's those kinds of opportunities that we'll see economic growth, and you don't have to pick the winners and losers as you go along.
Great. Let's talk specifically about one of those industries, and that is tourism. Tourism is a significant driver of the Utah economy overall, and that's especially true here in Washington County. However, some are concerned that the overcrowding of our national parks will ultimately affect that. So how will you promote tourism while ensuring that parks and recreation don't get overrun?
So this, I'm going to start from a broad perspective, and we're going to narrow it down to some specific solutions. Right now, we have 67%, over 67% of the land in the state of Utah is federally owned and managed. That makes that we're a bit penned in. As we get to some of the counties, rural counties, that percentage goes way up, 75, 85, 95% in Grand County as federally owned and controlled land. Wouldn't it be something if we had a governor that could lead out and show the rest of the country that we are, as a state, not treated like other states, particularly back east? We need to have a state land management plan. The state has passed one. We worked with county commissioners across the state to present it, to have it. We know how to manage our lands in a very smart and effective way. What if, and going back to water infrastructure, we saw the Lake Powell pipeline and we could create an acre for acre trade for the corridor that the Lake Powell pipeline would come into the state of Utah, take that acreage, and actually let that corridor be done in a way that could generate agriculture and smart economic development, but take that acreage and expand our national parks and expand, and most importantly, access to those national parks. There are areas around Zions that are as hikeable, as beautiful as the actual official national park. We could take acre for acre, expand our national parks, create additional infrastructure through roads and access to our national parks so that more people can access. There's no reason in the world why it should look like an I-15 in Salt Lake City traffic jam for people trying to get to our national parks. You can't continue in that vein. And so you've got to get that infrastructure and get greater access to it. But at the same time, let's find some smart solutions when we do it that can address some of the issues that Utah faces.
Great. We experienced that here this weekend.
Yeah, I can imagine. The
here.
weather's changing and people feel penned in. They're going to be coming out in droves.
They head our way.
Yes.
Let's talk about that migration, the rural and urban divide that we see in the state of Utah. And oftentimes in southern Utah, we feel neglected, for better use of another term, from Wasatch Front conversations that still have a statewide impact. How do you unite the state and ensure that all of Utah has a say and has a voice?
So it is true. I mean, I was in the legislature. I saw the rural issues and needs that need to be addressed. The 80% of Utah's population living in just 4 counties out of 29 counties, Utah County, Salt Lake County, Davis and Weber County. That's a valley. It's a 130-mile stretch. And it's not like Dallas-Fort Worth where you can just keep sprawling. So what's happening along the Wasatch Front, where 80% of Utah's population lives, is you're having congestion failure in transportation. The commutes are getting longer. It's congested in traffic both directions on any road you get on nowadays. You have a scarcity of housing. You have more demand for housing than you have supply. That makes, in the supply and demand world, the cost goes through the roof. So you have a quality of life that is going down. You have a cost of living that's going up. And at the same time, rural Utah is looking around saying, hey, we got some serious issues that we need addressed, and we can't keep our young people living in their communities because they're looking for a job. And what are they doing? Young people are leaving the rest of these counties trying to find their way and life and careers in the Wasatch Front. For the first time in 2021, I'm proposing to you that the interests of the people that live in the Wasatch Front align perfectly with the people that live in the rest of the state. And this is how. The Wasatch Front needs a relief valve. They cannot be the magnet of 80% of Utah's future population growth or current population as it is today. It needs to see the rest of the state grow and see that infrastructure investment because it's going to relieve the traffic congestion. It's going to relieve the clean air issues and the scarcity of housing. When you see more prosperity happen throughout the state, it also allows young people that don't live in the Wasatch Front to stay in the communities that they've grown up in and be able to find their lives and find their way where they live. Every single year during the census, our rural communities are losing state lawmakers, House members, and House and state senators. That trend has got to stop. The way it stops is we see this whole state grow. And now the good news is the people on the Wasatch Front, the public, if you have a governor that can connect the dots, their interests are your interests. Now they align, and that's where you get the political will.
Great, thank you for that. Let me ask you about as we talk about the legislature and the disparity that we see there. The legislature actually passed legislation to place Utah's public degree granting colleges, universities, and technical colleges under a single governing body. How do you see these reforms impacting both workforce quality and readiness?
So I'm nervous about it, to be frank with you. It happened while I'm a recovering legislator now. I've been out of the legislature now for a couple of years, and I'm watching this and watching the legislature with a new perspective, understanding it's not as uh, easily understood when you're watching as a citizen versus when you're in the middle of it. That's logical, probably, but it took me going through that exercise to see that this reform that we're seeing roll out. I am nervous. I have a great faith, and we need a strong technical college and presence in our state. I think manufacturing is only going to grow. I think making sure that our workforce is prepared for the changing economy and the different skill sets that workers will need. I want our technical schools to be robust, and I want them to really fit the economic needs of the state. If collapsing it into one governing body creates efficiencies, that's great. But what I'm worried about is there going to be the same emphasis or concern in higher education, in our state institutions of higher learning, as there has been in our technical schools? And I would have to be convinced that we are truly seeing the efficiencies we want there. What I'd like to make sure is that we are communicating, that these aren't silos, and we're not seeing adults fighting over adult systems and seeing waste as a result. But I want to see that overlap or that alignment. But right now, when I visit our technical schools, I'm worried that they might feel like they're getting left out, or that this isn't making them as strong as they could possibly be. So I guess I would say, with the information I have, watching it from afar, I would want to make sure those efficiencies are there. Or what I would really want to do is ensure that we have a very robust technical college and school system like we do our institutions of higher learning.
Great. You mentioned COVID earlier. I want to get to that because that's a big component of what's happening right now in our state and nationwide, and in fact, globally. What do you consider to be the proper role of government when addressing a pandemic like COVID-19?
So I'm watching some things that feel a little surreal. We are watching our constitutional freedoms, our constitutionally protected liberties and freedoms under assault. And I'm not saying they're at risk of being lost. I'm arguing that the freedom of religion. Churches were closed down. If you are a member of a faith that decided to not hold Sunday services, you might not be aware that there were churches in this state that wanted to worship, and they wanted to be careful while they did it. But our state government said you couldn't. And now they're giving out stipulated, non-negotiable stipulations on how church service can occur inside of these houses of worship. That is not the role of government, not even in including a state of emergency. You can't have these devices that ring your phone like an Amber Alert, asking who you are and where you're going and what your health status is. We can't have state government saying you are an anointed essential business and you're not an essential business. If a business supports a family and it supports a household, it feels pretty essential if you're talking to those individuals. We have seen the erosion or the violation of our constitutional rights. I'm going to tell you what's the proper role of government. The Bill of Rights and our Constitution apply even in a state of emergency. I can't believe I have to say that out loud, but you can't infringe on these rights and our constitutionally protected liberties in a time of emergency. You have to probably especially be guarded and careful that you're not infringing on those. And I don't think that's happened in this experience we're living through right now. I think there's some real concern for me concerning things that have happened. And I think there's a lot of fear. Look, fear is contagious. I'm watching it in real time, but so is courage. And that's what I love about Southern Utah and Washington County. You guys love freedom. I don't think you're looking for this state-sanctioned yellow status of economic activity. You guys are red, white, and blue. You want to get back to work with safe precautions, but you're ready to go, and you don't need a government holding you back.
So let's talk about the economic impact as well. I mean, obviously the erosion on liberties, but let's talk about the economic impact, and not just with businesses, but with the state, because state revenues have significantly declined and been impacted by COVID-19, and that has a ripple effect. How do you plan to work with the legislature to manage budget shortfalls and recover that revenue?
Thank you for asking, because this is the reality, and you just nailed it. If there isn't commerce occurring, there's not tax collection occurring. And I worry that we are going to see some of the largest gaps in our budgets, state, county, and city, in unprecedented ways. And here's going to be the challenge. And I've lived through this in the legislature in better economic times, but you have a federal government that loves, as a carrot, to throw out federal funds. Those federal funds always come with strings attached in terms of how you're going to spend their money. But then they put their claws into your state budget and they dictate how you're going to spend your state budget. Well, there isn't a federal dollar I've ever seen that's given states greater sovereignty. There isn't a federal dollar that ever received that's made your locally elected legislators in the House and Senate and your governor, giving them greater ability to build the budget and address the issues of constituents. That federal approach is one that we've seen No Child Left Behind and the federal mandates that don't fit Utah, or even in the race to the top federal funds in Common Core as a result of that, taking those federal funds, or most recently the Obamacare expansion, which is now draining our state budget in a record amount based on an income of someone, not on if they're disabled mentally or physically, or children. This Obamacare expansion, we stopped it in the House in 2015. It passed in 2018 with an initiative and a tax increase. But what we were saying in 2015 applies today, and that is the more of those dollars you accept and this percentage that they demand of our state budget that has to go along with that federal program will take dollars away from the priorities that we have in this state. So what do you need in a governor? My last 10 seconds on this answer is we have to have the courage to tell the public what's really going on in this relationship with the federal funds. We have to sharpen our pencil on state budgets and resist those federal funds as much as possible. You need a governor that is willing to lead and tell the people the truth to accomplish that.
Right. You mentioned taxes, so let's talk taxes. It's everyone's favorite topic, right? Especially as April rolls around and we've got to file. But the legislature, it was supportive of changes that would allow state income tax to be used for other items beyond public education. What other changes to the tax structure or process would you recommend as governor?
So I've been a supply sider since I arrived as a freshman in this House of Representatives. And what I mean by that is, look, we could try to raise taxes, shift taxes. I just know this. Every year I was a member of the House of Representatives, we saw surplus. That means the amount of money we thought that the state would collect in tax revenue from the economic activity going on, we saw more arrive by taxpayers than what was estimated when the economy was doing well. And we saw shortfalls where the amount that was projected didn't arrive when the economy has retracted. And that's the relationship. Nothing else is. You can say we're going to tax more or we're going to tax different. All I know is this: when you grow the pie, when you see economic activity and success and prosperity, that's how the dollars arrive. So in 2007, we cut income tax. It was a progressive 7% state income tax. We were told, and then we also cut the state tax off of food. It's about $400 million. And we were told, look, you're taking $400 million out of schools, out of state budgets. And we knew back then that if you had $400 million that would have otherwise been taxed and collected running around in our economy, it would make this economy stronger. And guess what? It's not a theory. It's exactly what happened. We saw our revenues rise as we cut those taxes. So when we talk about some of that longer play on economic development, seeing economic prosperity and opportunities throughout the whole state, that's growing the pie in a way, Don, that I believe that will solve whatever structural imbalances or challenges we have with tax collection. You do it a conservative way, you make sure there's prosperity and lots of it throughout this whole state, and you'll see that the state will be able to pay its bills and deliver the services that it needs to and be conservative while they're doing it.
Great. Let's talk public lands now. We're going to shift a little bit. You mentioned this earlier in your response, but what will you do as governor to retain local control of lands and better manage the vast and valuable public lands?
So in my time in the state legislature, there were some camps out there that we were all talking about the same thing in terms of local control of our lands and this oppression we feel when the federal government manages the land or doesn't do a very good job managing it, makes it prohibitive for us to grow, makes access for corridors for infrastructure hard. There's all these challenges that are inherent to the federal government still owning and controlling the land of our state in such a high percentage of our state area landmass. But I've always heard different ways of how you approach it. What we saw in the last years that I was serving as speaker is we saw people coming together with the state land management plan that was the state of Utah, but with our county commissioners. We put a constitutional defense funding committee together that talked about the constitutional issues that Utah grapples with, where we have the challenges other states don't have. You have a unique opportunity with the governor. There's only 50 of them in the country who can really start to make this a much more understood issue nationally with conservatives across this country, and particularly in Washington, D.C. We need to have a very strong effort from the state, and it has to be coalesced. Our local leaders, our Washington delegation, our legislature, and your governor, and really make this case to our administration on how we as a state can do a far better job managing these lands. There's some great work going on. Let me get specific. Payment in lieu of taxes. Some call it pennies in lieu of trillions. There is some great work that's being done to show what the real value of that land is, that if the federal government's going to say, look, we'll pay you because you're not receiving a tax for it. Well, they've been underpaying, as we all know, for a long, long time. There's ways to quantify that value of that land to say to the federal government, if you're not going to let us control it, you got to at least honor your obligation and pay. That would be a revenue stream that is much bigger and could go to the areas of like public education and other things that we've not seen before. So let's push this. Let's have some uncomfortable conversations and get to some solutions. You have to do that with a governor that's ready to be loud on this issue.
Great. Let's talk about the Lake Powell pipeline. You mentioned that as well. This is a critical topic for Southern Utah. If growth continues as forecasted in Washington County, there are concerns that the water supply will not be sufficient for our needs, both residential and commercial use. Do you support the Lake Powell pipeline? Why or why not? And what other mechanisms can the state use to ensure that the water supply in Southern Utah is sufficient for future growth?
I support the Lake Powell pipeline wholeheartedly. There's a 4-state compact, water shares in the Colorado River that we're entitled to. If it goes downstream and other states enjoy that water and we don't access that water for the growth that's coming and is here and is happening in real time, we lose that. And so we have to get that Lake Powell pipeline completed. Beyond the Lake Powell pipeline, I've learned a lot from good water planners. A saying that the rural legislators used to tell me all the time: you don't drink out of the well you dug. And I'm going to tell you, since 1902, the first reservoir began construction in 1902 in the state of Utah, it would have been very easy at the time to say, well, that's over-engineered, that's too expensive, that doesn't match the population. But this is a pioneering state and a state that grows from within. And our leaders, our public servants from long, long ago, they understood the role of Utah. We have to understand that pioneering spirit and that understanding that we are a state that grows from within. And we have to make some of those generational decisions that those before us made. We didn't get to 3.5 million people by not understanding that role and how you prepare for it, particularly with water. So beyond the Lake Powell pipeline, there are some, you can see, especially in Washington County and Southern Utah, the preparation and the work that was done to bring water. We have aquifers. We have water conservancy districts that work every day to make sure our water infrastructure is there. The state of Utah needs to take a more active role. You in Southern Utah can't be all on your own trying to get this right. You need the full weight of a state, seeing the state and its whole population grow, to be your partner in making sure that we get that water infrastructure right, just as we've done throughout the state, and particularly the Wasatch Front up until now. We can do that going forward.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We appreciate your willingness to jump in, to run. We know that this is not for the faint of heart. There's a lot that goes into campaigning and sharing that message. So we really do appreciate you spending the time with us today. I'll turn it to you for the last 2 minutes for closing statements.
So thank you. So you could hear a lot of overlap in these questions that you've asked and that I've answered. And you know why? Because we're just talking about how does this state continue on the path that it's gone on up until now. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. This is the Beehive State. It's the state of industry. This is our heritage and our history as a state, and we need to continue that. That's why these questions really, you hear some of the similar discussion or points being shared in each of the answers. Here's what we have in 2020 in this race right now. You have Democrats. You have one of the most prolific and most liberal. He was a state senator, Jim DeBacchus. He was the Democrat party chair in the state of Utah. He is a registered Republican today. He has changed his party affiliation. You're seeing Democrats change their party affiliation to Republican because there is a true desire to turn this state purple and then blue. They want this to be a blue state, and they're not shy about it anymore. Utah needs to elect a conservative governor, someone that's going to call that out and not candy coat it or try to be nice about it. We can't have electioneering and having Democrats just for a short period of time become registered Republicans so they can manipulate our gubernatorial primary. And that's what they're saying they're doing. They're doing it for that reason. In fact, one interview on a public radio station in Salt Lake City said, I'm switching as a Republican so Greg Hughes doesn't win. So I'm going to tell you, this state, to be red, to be conservative, to enjoy the prosperity it's done up until now, there's been a formula here. We can do this again, and we have to understand that there are people working very hard to change that trajectory and change the way that Utah approaches these issues. We can't be purple. We can't be blue. The way we resist this is we have leaders that are unapologetically conservative and red. So I'm making my plea to those that are watching. We are the Hughes-Iverson ticket is your conservative ticket. We understand how we got here, and we will work with you in a conservative way to make Utah continue it on its path to prosperity.